fight. Okay.
Hello, and welcome to episode 14 of Super Deep Movie Analysis. This is Lec Zorn, along with guest co-host Michelle Gussow. Well, last August and September, we were doing one of these about once a week when we went through the entire um, first 6 Rocky movies in preparation for Creed, and then we even tacked on a little supplemental episode um, on the 2 Creed trailers. And so now, both of us having seen the movie Creed multiple times, we're going to do an episode on that now. And, Michelle, these last 6 months, I really missed these episodes. I got spoiled doing the one a week there for a while, and that was something I was, every week, after we finished one episode, I was always looking forward to the next one. So
Me too.
now, here we are again with Creed, which was the 7th movie in the Rocky series. And, after I believe that one of the problems with Rocky 5 is that Rocky 4 did so well they almost had to make a sequel, but yet there wasn't an obvious next step, and I think that Stallone had a hard time coming up with a good concept for it. And even though, as we said, there are some great moments in that film, it's a film I think was probably made in large part because they almost had to cash in on the series after Rocky 4. I believe the same thing with the Karate Kid Part 3. It's another movie that really was made for the sake of having another sequel, and which is a trend that started, of course, in the 80s. But then despite that, I think that had the series ended with Rocky 5, the last scene of that movie would have been a suitable end for the character. It looks like Rocky and his son are walking away into the twilight of Rocky's life. And then certainly the movie Rocky Balboa 16 years later would have been a suitable end to the series. And you see Rocky, having let out his, anger in that Dixon fight, and then come to accept his wife's death, and then move on, presumably, into the twilight of his life. And both very emotional endings, because in each case I left the theater thinking that was it, So, and I remember on a Rocky discussion list on Yahoo groups right after Rocky Balboa came out, we talked about, could there be a 7th one, or would there be any possible, scenario in which the 7th movie would be good. And, we discussed different ideas, but didn't come up with anything that I thought, was really that good. So I think that if the Rocky series were going to continue, I think they found a great way to do it.
Well, yeah, I mean, that seemed like a logical next step to me, that Rocky would start training somebody.
Yes.
I think that
it did, but I think further than that, though, I feel like it worked better because they shifted this protege into the main role.
Well, yeah, definitely. And it, as we said, this is Creed Rocky 7, or is it Creed 1?
Yeah, well, Stallone emphasized that, before the movie came out, that it was Creed 1 as opposed to Rocky 7. However, I really think it was a mix of the two. I think, I think there's too much continuity from all of the Rocky films, well, not 5, of course, but, from the series in general, even from Rocky Balboa. There's way too much continuity from those movies for it not to be considered a sequel. Because it does clearly continue the Rocky story. But it's simultaneously a spin-off because a great deal of the movie is devoted to this character who is not around in any of the previous films, and giving his backstory. And so obviously it was I'd say it's a sequel / spin-off. And as we were talking about during the episode, the supplemental episode on the Creed trailers, even though spin-offs happen all the time on TV series, I can't think of one previously happening in the movies, except for the Minions, who were a spin-off of the Despicable Me series. So it's a very unique film, and maybe this will inspire other spin-offs of popular movie series, but it's an interesting mix, combining the
Right.
two, and obviously, and of course, another thing that made it different, obviously, this one was directed and co-written by Ryan Coogler, who had no involvement in the previous films, wasn't even, hadn't even been born during the first four.
But he was obvious. Um, I was going to say he felt that deep connection to the films.
Oh, he did, yes, no
It's
question
one of
about
those
it.
things where it's obvious he wasn't what I'm going to call a passing fan who had an idea
Yeah.
for a Rocky movie. He obviously was really, really deeply connected.
No question about it. He and his father had shown him all the Rocky movies, and he was clearly a fan, particularly of Rocky Two, which ironically that I didn't think that was one of the better ones, but
Right.
nevertheless, he did he put in several overt references to Rocky Two in there, as we'll get to
Mm-hmm.
later on. But Ryan Coogler, obviously, well, turning a series though, since Stallone had written all of the previous six in the series, directed four of the six. John G. Avildsen directed one and five. It was a high risk move to turn the directing and the writing over to, a 29-year old, who's never been involved in the series before, but it paid off.
Yeah, and I think that he was working directly with Stallone. So
Yeah.
I always, my speculation there is that Stallone probably didn't hesitate
hmm
to give some input, little advice.
Yeah, and of course, obviously, Robert Chartoff and Erwin Winkler, who produced the previous movies, were also involved in the
Right,
production of
yeah.
this. And Robert Chartoff, I believe, is the one who died, shortly after production. In fact, the movie they have a notice of his death in the closing credits. But and of course, one thing that for those of you who haven't worked in film, which I'm assuming is the majority of the people watching this, one thing that's important to remember is that um, a screenplay is very rarely ever recited by the actors word for word. I mean, there's a lot of ad libbing and direct and actors coming up with things that fit their voices better, things like that. I do it all the time. I rarely ever read my lines verbatim, and I very rarely am ever corrected by. Now, if the director says no, do it verbatim, of course I do it. But um, I brought that up to say that I haven't seen a script of Creed, and it'd be interesting to compare Rocky's lines as written to what Stallone actually said in the film. I don't know if Stallone modified the lines to make him sound more Rocky like.
Yeah, that would be an interesting.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
hadn't actually
yeah,
thought of that.
yeah.
That would be very interesting.
Yeah, so and sometimes, by the way, scripts for movies do turn up online. I've seen a
Right.
few, and it's interesting to compare, the just to follow along and compare the script to what actually ended up happening
Yeah.
on film. So I hope to find a Creed script online. There is, by the way, an original script of Rocky online, which is significantly different from the final product. So it's worth looking up. Um, but all right, so Creed came out last year, the day before Thanksgiving. Came out November 25th. Grossed 173 million worldwide, including 109 million in the USA. The biggest hit in the series since Rocky 4, 30 years earlier. So clearly, from the first scene, it's obvious that this isn't only a sequel. We open in a juvenile detention center in 1998, and I've never been inside a juvenile detention center, but it looks realistic to me. I would guess it probably is.
Yeah, I
Um,
too have never
yeah, I mean, I
been in.
yeah, Coogler seems to know what he was doing for that scene. I mean, it looked very realistic, and we see, um, that it's obviously not the best atmosphere for boys to be in. It's sort of like prison. Obviously there's some people you have to keep out of society, but at the same time you wonder, does being in prison or does being in a juvenile detention center make you a better person? And but so obviously not a very good atmosphere. But anyway, there's an alert. There's a fight, going on, and you see a young Adonis, played very powerfully by Alex Henderson, um, beating up another kid, and then we see Marianne Creed, Apollo's widow, who we haven't seen since Rocky Four.
And who, just the way it is, we don't know who she is because it's not the same actress.
Yeah, it was Sylvia.
I mean, okay, we do know, if obviously people you see online now, you go to IMDb, things like that, you know who it is, but they don't tell you up front. You just see this woman.
Yeah.
And it is a different actress, so you don't automatically know who it is.
Right.
What she's doing.
Although she is addressed as Marianne, which, but if I remember correctly, though, I think the name Marianne was only mentioned once in Rocky 2. I don't think her name, Apollo's wife's name, was ever mentioned in Rocky 4. The only thing I remember, when Apollo was reading hate mail to his wife, he addressed her as Marianne. So you'd have to really be a big fan of the series probably to even get that reference.
Right.
But anyway, though, so she checks in to the juvenile detention center and visits Adonis, and he explained that he had beaten this kid because, he had said something about his mother who had died.
Right.
And so then, this is one of those really good scenes, and, I think Alex Henderson, for a kid that age to, do a scene like that, a lot of times kid roles in movies, the kids just have to look cute. I mean, this is one scene where you really have to be able to act, and I think, he did a really, really good job with it.
Oh, yes.
So, he's a kid who seems to have, a future in the business if he wants to, and he looks like he could look about like Michael B. Jordan might have 17 years earlier. And but anyway, so Mrs. Creed comes in, and you don't really, you have to really pay attention to the dialogue to figure, if you don't already know, you have to figure out from the dialogue gradually who she is.
Yeah. And what was really interesting is because she doesn't want to be introduced.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Either she's keeping that from Adonis, so so that the audience can get it as he does, or there's some building to that, and we were talking about how they introduced the title. So
yeah,
it was the same for everybody.
So she says that she knows what it's like to lose someone and all the anger she went through, and he of course thinks that she's gonna take him to some kind of a new foster home or something, and
or group home,
which he doesn't want to do, and of course the attendant at the center had told Mrs. Creed that Adonis is a good kid but fights all the time, and obviously someone and I'll talk about that more later in the film, but anyway, he obviously has a lot of anger, that he never knew his father, and apparently based on that scene didn't even know who his father was.
Right.
And so who knows what he had been told, and so finally she invites him to come stay with him, and in the course of the conversation he mentioned not having a father, and she had told him that he did, even though that he had died before Adonis was born. And
something during the conversation at your point we were both discussing too was he's sitting there with he's standing there with a fist.
Yes.
And as she is inviting him to come live and be part, he unclenches the fist, and you can. So to me, it's like he does have that willingness to be open and accept love.
Yeah, and I thought it was a really well done scene, and because it's a close up of the fist, and you just see that tension and that aggression, that he's just always ready to hit somebody, and then finally Marianne gets him to calm down, you know. So it was a very well done scene. It's one of those things most people who don't work in film would probably never notice something like that. But, you know, certainly being that we're both detailed people, detail-oriented people to begin with, and obviously working in film, we notice the little things like that that can really enhance a film. And, yeah, you made a good point about how, you know, finally when, you know, Adonis learns he had a father, he asks what was his name, and then it switches to just the title across the screen.
And something I wanted to address, to me, what Marianne did, reaching out to the child, I don't know how to refer to this, of her husband's
like
indiscretion.
Yes.
A lot of women would not do that.
Oh, no question about it.
I think that, so that says, to me, that says a great deal about who she is.
Yeah, and as we mentioned privately before, the character of Marianne Creed was so lightly developed that gave Coogler a lot of room to, you know, make her, you know, whatever he wanted to be and make it believable. You know, she was probably in 2 and 4 combined for less than 5 minutes. And you know, obviously, even if she had been a heavily developed character in 30 years, a lot can change, especially after the death of her husband.
Right.
But, you know, although I will say that Sylvia Meals in her brief portrayal in 2 and 4 did seem, you know, more, you know, meek and you know, submissive. You know, whereas Phylicia Rashad, who plays Marianne in this film, does seem more tougher and more aggressive. But then, you know, 30 years...
And more passionate.
Yes.
Of course, there's more to work with. I think the only time in, I guess, 4, you know, is when Apollo's dying in the ring. You know, like...
yeah,
she stands up and is screaming, but...
Yeah.
That's really all that you see.
Yeah, and you see, there's the, you know, that's, yeah, that you're right. And of course, she had that brief moment with Brigitte Nielsen right before the fight. Right. You know, so yeah, she didn't really get much to do, in the series, but.
No, I was just saying when she's obviously so upset when she sees what's happening to her husband in the ring. That's the most real, like, emotion or highly emotional scene she had.
Yeah, and you know, and I've also thought about, you know, the scenario of, you know, adopting the product of your husband's infidelity. You know, is that a realistic scenario? And I really don't know, but I will say this, you know, if had Apollo lived and Marianne found out about this illegitimate child, it very well could have killed their marriage. But maybe because her husband was dead, she was more forgiving, and, you know, didn't have the hostility that she might have had toward him had he been alive. And, you know, maybe she began, after 13 years, she began, you know, to, you know, remember her love for her husband, and maybe adopting this child would, you know, help her feel closer to you know, her husband.
Well, and to me, despite the fact that later you find out she really doesn't want him fighting,
right,
she is probably looking for some part of her husband in him.
That could be, yeah. And so then, you know, he skips, and another thing I want to say, and I'll be talking a lot more about the music in the film later, but, you know, one parallel I see to this in the first one, you know, much of Bill Conti's music from the original was based around the theme. It was based around the melody of "Gonna Fly Now," but it was done to different moods to fit the situation. And, you know, when at the right before it shows the title on the screen, you hear the melody from Ludwig Göransson, who does a lot of the music for this movie. You hear that melody, da 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 da, which, you know, you hear in various forms throughout the movie. So you hear it for the first time in a very gentle manner, and which fits with Adonis calming down and becoming receptive to going to live with Marianne.
I imagine too is that even if he wasn't that, I'm going to say high on the idea, he doesn't know this woman, he doesn't, but it sounds better to him than staying in in the system.
Yeah, and then of course to know that he has a father, or that he had a father, obviously that's something, obviously he wants to know more,
Right.
And so then, we see 17 years later, in a scene that, as we discussed, has, some similar qualities to the first scene of the original, where you see a low-level boxing match. This one is in Tijuana, Mexico, in pretty rowdy club, and we see Adonis, basically beating a minor opponent pretty easily.
Right.
And then we see 12 hours later he's working for a some kind of white collar job. It's says on the wall Smith Bordney Financial Group.
Right.
We don't know exactly what he does, but based on the way he's dressed and the kind of office he's in, he appears to be doing okay. But then he goes and quits his job, says he's going to fight full time, and he goes home and initially doesn't tell his mother, and we see that they still, they seem to have a cordial relationship. We see that she must have managed her money well. She's still, living in a mansion.
Right.
Yeah.
And is obviously able to provide, I think in her mind, education for the kids, so that they would not be fighting.
Yeah, which is similar to what Adrian said in Rocky V's, was saying that she wanted her son to solve problems with his mind.
Right.
Typical mom idea. my mom would have told me the same thing, and so anyway, Adonis, and by the way, I want to back up a little bit. I mentioned Phylicia Rashad plays Marianne Creed, and I guess she's best known for The Cosby Show as the mom. And one of the biggest misconceptions, by the way, that I get from people who don't work in film is that sitcom actors or comedy actors in general are lightweights. They're doing comedy because, that's all that they're capable of doing. And truth be told, comedy is one of the hardest genres to do well. And when you're a comedy actor, your delivery is and your timing is so important, and those are things that non-film people generally don't even think about. So, being a sitcom star does not in any way mean you're a lightweight, and it's relatively rare that a sitcom star will ever get a chance to have a big role in a major movie. And it's not unheard of, but it doesn't happen a whole lot,
See, now you do that, and I'm trying to run down my head to see if I can think of anybody.
Yeah, I mean, it's happened, it just doesn't happen a lot. And so, Rashad, does a good job in this role, although it's interesting that a lot of her performances, and this is a testament to her, a lot of her best moments in the film are when she's alone.
Mm-hmm.
And that's more of a challenge because, as you know, in acting, it helps a lot when you play off the person you're doing a scene with.
Oh, yeah.
So, anyway, so he goes to the gym, and Adonis goes to the Delphi Boxing Academy where his father trained.
Right.
And he goes to a guy called Little Duke, who you have to pay a little bit of attention to figure this out, but Little Duke is actually the son of Duke, who was initially Apollo's trainer and then Rocky's trainer. He, Paulie, and Rocky were the only three people who appeared on screen, not counting flashbacks, in the first 6 movies. One of the commentators appeared at least in voice in all 6, but anyway, Little Duke is played by Wood Harris, and for whatever reason he doesn't want to train Adonis. And it's never... What do you think the reason is for that?
I ended up getting the impression that... I wasn't going to say that he thought he was fighting for the wrong reason, but... to me, if you look at it, boxing is actually a skill to me. Boxing is a skill. And then there's fighting.
Yeah.
And I had the sense that he thought Adonis just wanted to fight and not necessarily be that skilled boxer.
Yeah, yeah.
That he had something driving him that was the wrong thing.
Okay, well that could be. It's never explicitly explained, but anyway, Adonis gets in the ring. He challenges anybody who'll fight him.
Right.
And then, possibly the only reference in the movie to Rocky Five, Adonis declines to wear head protection, just as Tommy Gunn in Rocky Five, the first time he boxed for Rocky, declined head protection then. And anyway, so he knocks out the first guy, but then he's challenged by a fighter named Danny Stuntman Wheeler, who was, I believe, listed as the #1 light heavyweight contender, played by real-life boxer Andre Ward, and he knocks out Adonis. And one thing that's interesting that we see throughout the movie is that whenever we see a boxer for the first time, it freezes and it gives you the data on the fighter. And, you know, that's... I've thought about that, and I guess it's better to do that than to just insert some like awkward line, like, you know, having like somebody, you know, send to the side of the ring, said, oh yeah, that's so and so, he's, you know, has a record of 18-0, and he's the #4 contender in the world, you know.
No, but see, that whole sequence where he gets knocked out, I think goes to show where little Duke was even thinking. He gets in the ring, he's too cocky, he just doesn't have the right mindset in his mind.
Right.
I mean, obviously, and I do think that his mindset ends up changing. But I think that's what it is, because if you are in there boxing for the right reasons, then, you're amused, then, psychology, then, no, what happens is you're thinking more of your safety as well. You're not just thinking about going in there and I'm going to show how good I am. I'm not, you know, come in here, I'll knock you out too. I'll not, you know, it just, you could see from that sequence that the attitude was wrong and that little Duke was right. And that whole thing might have been there so that people weren't going, gee, why doesn't he want to train him? You know.
It's a good assessment, probably as good as an assessment as any, you know.
And that's why we're here, to offer ours. If anybody, that's one thing too, if anybody else has an assessment, you know, you are definitely welcome to share it in the comments.
Oh yeah, please do. Yeah, we always love that.
Yeah, we love the feedback.
Yeah, it's always interesting to hear what other people think, and you know, you have, you know, a million people watch a movie, they see it a million different ways, and you know, you don't even have to work in film to, you know, have a solid opinion. You know, if you watch movies, you're entitled to, you know, have an opinion on it. You know, but
anyway.
Yeah. So and one thing I suspect, I mean, and it's just a guess, but you know, it's the best guess I've seen. The closest, you know, I mentioned how when you see a boxer for the first time, it freezes and then you get the data on the boxer. In the 1997 ESPN miniseries The Bronx is Burning, which was a biography of the 1977 New York Yankees, when you see a character for the first time, often it shows his name on the screen. And again, it's better than, you know, hearing somebody say, "Oh yeah, that's Thurman Munson," or, you know, "That's Paul Blair," you know, because I know you and I have talked before, and I've talked about it as well with my brother Robert McAtee, who's also an actor. That, you know, we don't like it when, you know, they just insert really bad dialogue just to convey essential information. You know,
absolutely.
Like something that nobody would say in real life. You know?
Right, absolutely.
But anyway, so then Adonis, you know, he's humbled by, you know, his beating from Danny Stuntman Wheeler. He goes back home, and then there's a really powerful scene where, you know, his mom comes home, sees that he's been beaten, and then of course he gives a typical answer that you give to your mom: "It's not that bad." And then she says that, you know, "I like the line, I ought to knock you out myself."
And you know what's really interesting about that is, maybe it's because it's Phylicia Rashad. I believed she could do it.
Yeah.
There was just something about it. I believed it.
Yeah.
I believed she could have knocked him out.
Oh yeah. And, you know, it's one of those things where obviously, you know, she, you know, her husband having been killed at boxing, you know, she would have a reason, you know, for being particularly passionate about it.
And at that point too, even if he hadn't been, what she's saying to him about the things she had to do, you know, carry him up the stairs and let's take care of certain personal needs because his hands didn't work.
Yeah, and obviously trying to shock him, and I like Adonis's attitude where she's giving him the lecture and he goes, I know, like. And it's a situation where he knows no matter what she says, he's going to keep boxing anyway.
Right.
And he's just trying to get through.
Well, right, exactly, and I'm saying I know he doesn't. He was not there.
Yeah.
And and there's certain things that just boxing in Tijuana he's not going to know.
Yeah.
And where so.
Yeah, of course I don't know. I don't know if she had told her those details before or not. It
sounded like she hadn't, because the way they came out, it just something about the way she expressed that.
Yeah.
There was probably all this time she was hoping she wasn't going to have to bring these things up.
That could be as well.
I think she obviously had steered him in a different direction.
Yeah.
And had hoped it had taken.
But just as even as great, as Adrian was for Rocky in many ways, she never quite fully accepted that he was a fighter. Mm-hmm. That's what he did. That's who he was, and she had a hard time with that. She spent the bulk of, her, the bulk of 2 through 5 trying to stop him from boxing. Mm-hmm. And it's one of those situations where she should have known from the start that's who she married.
Right. Oh, exactly.
And of course, and then it's slightly different, from wife to husband than mother to son, but nevertheless, there is the same principle. That's who her son is, whether she likes it or not.
Well, exactly. I think though, there was almost a thing there where I think she accepted that her husband was a fighter.
Yes.
So I think she accepted that, and she just didn't want to have to go through that again.
Yeah, understandably, but nevertheless, that's who Adonis is.
Oh, absolutely, and I agree with that. I'm just saying, I'm looking into her mindset.
Oh yeah,
and didn't want to, and it was and possibly losing him.
Oh yeah.
Same way. So, I think that's where she is, and we'll find ultimately. I think she was not resigned to it, as only. Is all you can do.
Yeah, and he tells her that he's going off to fight full time, and obviously she's not happy with it. But shortly before that, I enjoy this, the part where he watches. He goes to YouTube and finds one of the Apollo Rocky fights and watches it, and he's standing up and boxing along with it.
And, that was very well done.
Yeah, and it really, and that's the first time you get a really heavy taste of Ludwig Göransson's music, which I'll talk more about later on. But it's more classical oriented than what Bill Conti did. But it's also done with a modern action movie type feel to it. It's very they used a 100-piece orchestra, and it really packs a hard punch in my opinion, but. Anyway, you can tell that, he really was trying to get to know his father, who obviously he had never met. And, there's so much insight in that scene because there are so many kids who are troubled from having never known their fathers. I think every boy has the desire to feel like his father is proud of him,
And in that case, too, where he's boxing along, it's like that if he had known his father, his father would have given him some pointers.
Oh yeah,
so there he was in his own way getting the pointers, and they would have gotten.
And obviously, very very familiar with it, and we'll get more into that later. That we can tell that he obviously had studied his father closely, and certainly if just watching and being able to mimic all his boxing moves would there'd be some trading value in that at least. And there are a lot of people. I mean, like at the risk of getting too personally, my stepson from my marriage, he's never met his father, and that's he's 20 years old now, and that's a big source of sadness for him that he's never come to terms with it. I hope he will and be able to find peace and healing from that. So anyway, then Adonis heads to Philadelphia, and is proving that this is not only a Rocky sequel, it's also a spin-off. It's 16 minutes into the movie before we get our first look at Rocky. And,
yeah, so to anybody who kind of read the, I'm going to call them previews, before the movie even came out, and people were complaining that you didn't see Rocky till like 45 minutes in.
No,
it's not that long. People.
No, it's 16 minutes. And, basically, apparently he never fought again after the Dixon fight in Rocky Balboa. He's still running Adrian's restaurant. Seems to be doing well.
Well, and think about what a feat that actually is. Because to have a restaurant that is successful for that long.
Yeah.
I mean, that's totally as an aside, but if you look at it, it's like, wow. Because they say a lot of restaurants don't even last 3 years.
Yeah, and it said established 1995, so that means despite having only a 9th grade education, Rocky's managed to run a restaurant for 20 years now.
Right, he probably has a manager in there, but the thing is, I'm just saying, you see that, and he's doing well with it, and it's a successful restaurant, and it's not a franchise. So,
and he's involved with it, and it's something that he enjoys doing, clearly, right. And he's done pretty well for himself, and you just assume that's gonna how he's gonna live out the rest of his life, and obviously he keeps him occupied,
right.
So, and we know, as we noticed in the last movie, he gets up early in the morning, so which is repeated in this film, and in regard to Adrian's restaurant and some other elements, I've always been saying since I saw it, in a theater nearly 10 years ago, that Rocky Balboa is my favorite movie of the series. So I really appreciated that this movie does contain some continuity from it, in direct references to that movie, and we'll get to a couple more later. But so
I think too, one thing Ryan Coogler had to know is that if he messed up any of the continuity, there are millions and millions of dedicated Rocky fans who would have been right there to call him on it.
Oh, yeah.
And the movie would not have the success that it does.
Yeah, and of course, obviously, he had Stallone and, Chartoff and Winkler there as well.
Right.
So that was a pretty good safeguard. But,
right.
So anyway, Rocky meets Adonis and, picks out pretty quickly that Adonis, is a big fan, mentions that, like, one of the, pictures on the walls from the 10th round of the first fight, and then he starts, talking about things like the fight behind closed doors. And so Rocky obviously figures out that something is odd with this, and
right.
Adonis that finally reveals himself to be Apollo's son, which Rocky at first, doesn't believe, but then, finally becomes convinced of it.
Well, he said something about, call my mom.
Yeah, call Marianne.
Call Marianne, and number still works.
Yeah.
And that actually, I was thinking about saying the number still works, actually, to me, was kind of a dig, too, that Rocky hadn't called in all this time.
Oh, yeah,
Never kept in contact with her.
And that is one thing, that there, one thing that's interesting about this film is that it's started to explore something that really had never been explored, not in 4 or 5 or 6. We never really know what Rocky might have struggled with, like with guilt and things like that for not stopping the fight, because Apollo's death is not mentioned in either 5 or 6, and then in 4, of course, obviously it is mentioned, but it's never revealed. The possibility of Rocky having guilt for not stopping the fight is never
Well,
addressed.
I think that's whether or not I actually addressed this when we analyzed 4 or not, but I always felt like one of the reasons he felt like he had to fight Ivan Drago was the guilt. And that there was a part of him that if Drago killed him, he would have been okay with that too somehow because of the guilt. So either way, I mean, that's kind of how I looked at it.
Yeah, that's a good assessment as well. And so anyway, Rocky obviously well, that's the first time that was addressed, and then obviously I think Rocky seems to feel uncomfortable when it's pointed out to him that he hasn't talked to Marianne since the funeral 30 years earlier, and and it could be like you mentioned to me previously that he didn't contact her out of guilt, yeah, and thinking that she would blame him for her husband's death,
and certainly not be receptive.
Yeah, and then I also like the bit of conversation that ensues where Rocky acknowledges that the fight should have been stopped, and then Adonis counters by saying that that's maybe he wanted to go out that way or something like that. That wasn't the exact words, but
we had touched on that too. That that's why Apollo was like telling him, because even there he was. I think he'd already suffered some brain damage, and Rocky was there with the towel, and Apollo was shaking his head and telling him not to do it.
Well, his monstrous pride would never let him lose a match by throwing in the towel.
Right.
And
he'd rather go out the way he went out than.
Yeah, but then of course Rocky counters by saying, "I think he'd rather be here talking to you." And of course we don't know if Apollo, of course we don't know if he knew that this woman was pregnant at the time of his death. But he certainly had his wife and kids, and he apparently would have rather gotten killed than the fight being stopped. So I mean
Well, and again, psychologically, you have no idea. Because we never really explored Apollo Creed. With the movies, you never really got a sense of Apollo's deep background and
no
the pride and all of that. And we talked about with Soldier Song. There's I could talk about misperceptions and altered perceptions. I think with the same thing, you're talking about that he probably had it stuck in his brain somewhere. That if the towel was thrown in, that his whole family would be embarrassed or ashamed or not proud of him anymore. And of course he that's not true. Yeah. But somewhere in his brain, that was his reality.
And we don't know what kind of upbringing he might have had, where maybe his father wasn't around and he always felt this need to somehow prove his toughness or whatever. And that brings me to another point. There some people seem to have been upset that Coogler chose 30 years after we know the character died to reveal that he fathered an illegitimate child through adultery. But is it really that out of character with Apollo Creed, as someone who had an ego of that size, to think that he had a mistress on the side? I mean,
it's one of those things where you're surprised that there weren't more of them.
And there could be, you never know.
Yeah, that's true.
But I think it fits the character. It doesn't mean that he was the lowest creature ever to walk the planet. But I mean,
and I think it also fits. I mean,
it does fit. Yeah.
Not just with Apollo, but if you look at professional boxers, any other, what was a big thing at the time. Even there are, every time you turned on the news, some baseball player or football player or boxer was caught messing around.
Oh yeah, I mean, a few years ago, there's a study determined that the current players in the NBA had an average of one illegitimate child, and that means for every player who didn't have any, there was a player who had multiple.
Right.
And of course, the most embarrassing one, Sean Kemp, who's from Elkhart, Indiana, it was revealed that he had 13 illegitimate children with 9 women.
So. So where we're going is that basically it's not out of the question.
It's a very realistic scenario.
Right.
And another thing, it's important to remember, when you're a world famous athlete with money and fame, you're going to have, a lot of opportunities.
Right.
More opportunities. Quite frankly, more opportunities to get laid than most of us. and I think a lot of these guys, these celebrities who get involved in these sex scandals, Tiger Woods, Michael Douglas, and some of the others, I could be wrong, but I don't think that these people are out of control sex maniacs as much as they're just feeding their egos, and
the fact that they can.
Yeah, and and let's, I'm not a perfect man, if I were famous and rich and women were throwing themselves at me, I can't say that I wouldn't make a few indiscretions, I mean. I might, and I hope not, but the point is, it's a realistic scenario.
You're exactly.
And anyway, so Adonis you know, obviously wants Rocky to train him, but you do also sense the ambivalence, that Adonis feels toward Rocky, that he does. There is a tinge of bitterness there about it. Maybe blaming Rocky for not either for his father's death or at least for
not coming around.
Yeah, not being supportive of his mom after.
Or just I was almost thinking that if it's one of these things, if not Apollo, then Rocky, and maybe Rocky should have been at least coming around for the kids.
Oh yeah, exactly, and
maybe he felt that way.
That could be. And of course, and it should be noted, by the way, that Apollo's two children, who are shown for a few seconds in Rocky 2, are never even mentioned in this film.
Right.
They would be in their 40s now, so they would, but who knows? I mean, who knows where they are or what they're doing? But
maybe Creed 2 will answer that.
Yeah, that's right, and and of course that's brings me to another point. There are some things in this movie that don't seem to be there for any particular reason. Then, like we said before, when Stallone made the original Rocky, he apparently was not thinking about any sequels. But then from 2 on, obviously he was thinking that he was thinking about keeping the series going. And I think it's pretty obvious from this film that Coogler started off with sequels in mind.
Right.
So anyway, Rocky finally, after some prodding from Adonis, reveals that Apollo won that third fight.
Now, there was one thing too, because he says, who won it, and says he did. Now, what I would have to ask, did he really, or is that?
Yeah.
Because maybe Rocky's just telling him what, he thinks he wants to hear or thinks he should say.
Yeah.
Because who knows who won it, and so I think we still don't know.
That's
sure.
That's a possibility. Yeah, for sure. And so anyway, Rocky initially declines Adonis's request to train him, and obviously relents. After some prodding. But anyway, so Adonis goes to Mighty Mick's gym, which is back open again. It was closed in Rocky Balboa. So it's been up and down, because you remember when Rocky went back to the neighborhood in 5, it was closed. Then he reopened it. And then it was closed in Rocky Balboa. Now it's open again.
Right.
So it seems to be doing better than ever now.
Right, and the building, at least they haven't torn it down or condemned it or anything, which is what would have happened in that neighborhood, I think, realistically.
Yeah.
It's a landmark now, so they kept it. But I think what was interesting is that I like that how Adonis kind of worked his way into that, though. How he went to Rocky and said, "Okay, I know you said you want to train me. Can you just at least give me some pointers?"
Yeah.
And so that kind of got Rocky back into it. At least in that mindset, thinking about it.
Yeah, that was a good transitional scene. Yeah, and then so at Mighty Mick's, Adonis starts training with, what was the character's name here? I got the IMDb profile pulled up here. The name of the character is let's see. Okay, Pete Sporino, played by Ritchie Coster, whose biggest protege is his son, Leo the Lion Sporino, played by Gabe Rosado. But anyway, Adonis joins the gym, and and Pete Sporino agrees to help him out when he can. So Adonis trains and gets tries to get in shape, and then we see Rocky. First solo scene with Rocky. I guess it's the first solo scene with Rocky in the movie, where he goes to the cemetery. Still has that wooden folding chair that he keeps up in the tree. That's a nice reference to Rocky Balboa. And when we see, and sadly, of course, we already knew that Adrian had died. Now we see that Paulie has died as well from his tombstone, and Rocky's showing his loyalty to his best friend. Gives him a bottle of Four Roses bourbon for his birthday, which he describes as your favorite.
Yeah.
And there's another piece of insight. Rocky still reads a newspaper, which seemingly only people like in their 60s and above still do these days. I work occasionally, like one shift a week, as a retail clerk at a Cracker Barrel Old Country store, and I noticed that a lot of people in their 60s and 70s, come into the restaurant with a newspaper, which used to be very commonplace even 10, 15 years ago, and now it's pretty rare except for senior citizens. So that's just one of those things that just shows Rocky's age, and of course Stallone is 69, so he's still newspaper age. My dad still subscribes to a newspaper. He's 72. So, anyway, and then, I like the scene where he's talking to Adrian sitting there. I mean, it's just so much the way that you could see that if Adrian were alive, that he would actually be talking to her just about random innocent things, that there's still that childlike quality in the character that there's been throughout the series. That even though he has a lot of street intelligence, he has a lot of wisdom, he's still childlike in some ways. And in fact, Stallone, even in his audio commentary for Rocky Balboa, said over the scene, over his speech to the Pennsylvania Athletic Commission, that the character, even while being childlike, still gets his points across.
Well, sometimes I think children are able to do that better.
I think so too. Yeah.
I think that adults don't like to pay a lot of mind to kids, or they think they're not supposed to. I don't know any other way to say that. But kids will be simple. They'll use easy to understand language to make their point. Yeah. I mean, even I'm guilty of, going on and on. Well, both of us.
Of course,
we go on, and And,
that's why we're dangerous when we do these untimed episodes.
Right, absolutely. And, I'll start dredging up my psychology studies and my philosophy studies, and kids don't have that. They just, and it make whatever they say. It just makes sense, and it's easy to understand.
Yeah, and I noticed that with my kids, when they were, little kids, they knew a lot more than I would have expected. Now, they didn't always know how to analyze and process that information, but at the same time, they also hadn't learned to distort and twist and rationalize things either.
Right.
So.
Or how to over-explain it.
Yeah. So, that, and Rocky still has some of that childlike innocence at times. Even at his age now, and just having an innocent conversation with his dead wife about the bills being paid, and things like that, and
I wonder about with that. What I was, little things that go through my mind when I was seeing it is that it was probably something that when she was alive, she probably handled it. So
that could be, yeah.
So he feels he's going to go and reassure her that it's being taken care of.
Yeah, I never thought about that, but that's a good point. So anyway, let's see. So finally, Rocky goes over to Mighty Mix, and he agrees to train Adonis, provided that he stays dedicated. And Pete Sporino tries to get Rocky to, and apparently has wanted for years for Rocky to train, his son.
Right.
And Rocky's declined, and so seeing Rocky at the gym, obviously Pete's hoping that it means Rocky's going to train his son now, but Rocky instead decides to stick with Adonis. And we don't know what Rocky's, motivation is. It could be that, he realizes that he misses being around the sport. It could be that, he still has something to prove, or maybe, he's doing it out of loyalty to Apollo. Because,
I think there's a little bit of all of that.
Yeah.
I always said there probably wasn't just one specific reason that he did it. I think it was a combination of things.
Yeah, that could be.
Yeah.
So anyway, Pete Sporino's obviously disappointed that Rocky's training this unknown kid from L.A. rather than Leo. And then finally, challenges Adonis to fight Leo, and Rocky feels that Leo isn't ready, but Adonis, of course, wants to do it. And along the way, Adonis meets a girl, Bianca, played by Tessa Thompson, who's not only an actress but also a professional singer. In fact, does a few songs on the soundtrack of the movie. And Bianca is a character that I always loved Adrian and was moved by the Rocky-Adrian relationship, because as I said in Rocky 5, in the Rocky 5 episode that we did, I've never been loved the way that Adrian loved Rocky, with that kind of selflessness and devotion. Granted, her one flaw was that she never fully accepted that she married a fighter.
Right.
But her unconditional love and devotion was unquestioned, and her selflessness toward her husband. But and of course Talia Shire is a fantastic actress. But Bianca is a character I just didn't feel much about one way or the other.
It was one of those things where I think they were attempting to give Adonis his own Adrian.
I think so. I
think so, and I think that's going to be fleshed out more in a sequel.
I think, yeah.
But in this, for me, in this particular episode, I think they were trying too hard to make her fit.
That could be.
I think. Because I think you could have done the movie without her, and it
would have worked.
Yeah,
okay? Absolutely.
They were trying very hard to make it look like you had to have her there.
Yeah, and whereas I don't think the original Rocky would have worked as well without Adrian.
Right.
But yeah, I think Coogler probably just felt he needed a love interest, you know.
Oh,
and it wasn't bad. It's not like, oh God, this is terrible, you know.
Right.
It didn't really do anything for me one way or the other.
Right, and I think that, like I say, it was, to me, it looked forced. So it was the only thing really that in the whole movie had like that feeling of, okay, and they're really trying too hard to make that one fit.
Yeah, and there was one cliche that it's a cliche that I hate. Granted, it's a minor detail in context of the whole film, but the fact that when they meet, and basically they meet because Adonis's apartment is above hers, and she's making a lot of noise with her music,
right.
and he complains to her about it, knocks on the door, complains to her about it, and she thinks he's a jerk. So. Of course, that means they end up falling in love.
Right, that is very cliche.
And of course, that's one thing I'll say about the Rocky-Adrian relationship. I mean, it was not a cliche romance. I mean, that she was this shy girl who he told bad jokes to in the pet store, I mean, it was a unique relationship, which is, I think, why people remember the relationship so much, because it's not...
Although, that is maybe, as a result, has become cliche, where you have now the romance where some guy's love brings the shy little girl out of her shell.
Yeah, but I
that's
think
become more of a thing after that.
Yeah, I think it was trend setting in that way. But on the other hand, Stallone, he also fell for one of the worst cliches ever in his movie Cobra, which was his first movie after Rocky IV. But basically, Brigitte Nielsen, who was his wife at the time in real life, and of course she played Ludmila, Drago's wife in Rocky IV. And near the beginning of Cobra, Brigitte Nielsen's character witnesses a murder, and Stallone is a cop who's assigned to protect her. Well, guess what happens?
Guess what happens? Okay, yeah.
So,
I can't imagine.
Yeah. But yeah, so obviously, because they don't like each other,
right.
At first, that is Adonis and Bianca, they're going to fall in love.
Oh, yeah.
So anyway, then, shortly after their first meeting, he decides to invite her out to dinner, and, it's an innocuous scene, and for whatever reason, it's just determined that she has progressive hearing loss and she will eventually go deaf, but is, in the meantime working as a singer. And, along the way, he, walks in, he sees a poster of her and, walks into a club where she's performing in concert. And so, anyway, so that Adonis has this fight with Sporino's son. What was his name again? Oh yeah, Leo the lion. Yeah, and one thing that's interesting that several people have mentioned online, the fight with Sporino. Well, let me back up. Ryan Coogler did a great job in this film, but if I ever meet him, I'm going to ask him if it was really necessary that there was not just one but two references to taking care of certain personal needs in this film, as you alluded to.
Yeah.
Where he's about to fight and then asks Rocky to cut his gloves off because he needs to relieve himself.
Yeah.
And then when Rocky's reluctant to, then Adonis asks Rocky if he's going to wipe him.
Okay.
And he did, and
take care of his.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, I don't really know why Coogler felt he had to like make two references to that act in the same film.
Right.
But I'm sure it's some, I'd like to know also, maybe, Coogler knows of a case where that actually happened before a boxing match. I'm sure it's happened sometime,
Okay.
But anyway, so the Sporino fight happens, and right when they're about to walk out, Pete Sporino tells Rocky that he called the gym out in L.A., found out that Adonis is Apollo's son. And we forgot to mention that, Adonis is going by the last name Johnson, saying that he wants to make it on his own. But anyway, Sporino finds out that, Adonis is Apollo's son, and Rocky asks, Sporino to keep quiet about it, which Sporino agrees to. But anyway, the fight with Sporino, it interestingly shot in one take, and several people pointed that out before I went back and watched it and confirmed that it is. And it goes into the second round, which creates a slight problem because the boxing rounds are 3 minutes, and it was not 3 minutes from, but still, it was extremely well shot, though. I mean, to shoot a boxing match with one camera and from a wide variety of angles. So I would have loved to have been there to observe what the cameraman was doing, because that's to do that kind of thing, especially So anyway, it's just really impressive to do anything that lasts 5 minutes or so with one shot, especially a scene that's so intense, very stunt oriented, where it relied on so many things to go right. And of course, I'd like to know how many times they shot that scene, but nevertheless, to do a fight scene in one take from all those angles with obviously the cameraman running all over the place, that was extremely impressive. And it would have been cool to have been there at the at the arena and just watch the cameraman.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's I think that the cinematography in this movie, I think from a standpoint of how the movie was shot, it's my favorite to watch visually in the series. I think Ryan Coogler did an outstanding job with that. What did you think? Did you?
No, I actually, we've talked about before, is I tend to pay more attention to the actors' performances rather than the camera angles. I guess I end up a little more focused.
Okay. Well.
On what people are feeling or thinking during scenes rather than that. So it's actually a good thing we both have different things that we notice. And you took that in, and I was watching this, probably his first considered professional fight, which was really interesting because they kept saying he had no record, but he'd had that like Tijuana record.
Yeah, it was
so
said.
To speak.
Yeah, it was said that he had 15 matches down there.
Right.
And had won them all. But anyway, so the next day, it's leaked to the media that Adonis is Apollo's son, and I think that Michael B. Jordan has a fair resemblance to a Carl Weathers. I mean, not big time, but enough that it's not a stretch, to be playing his son, and so obviously it becomes a major story, and it's never explicitly revealed, but my assumption was always that Pete Sporino, maybe out of sour grapes, especially after his son lost, leaked it to the media. Certainly the timing would be very suspicious. So anyway, then Bianca is upset with Adonis for not, volunteering the information. And, you obviously sympathize with Adonis. You understand why he would not want to be in that shadow, especially since, it's revealed in a, I don't know if it's before or after this point, but it's revealed right after Adonis moves in with Rocky that, Rocky Jr. has, moved to Vancouver to escape his father's shadow. And anyway, so Adonis, obviously, well, backing up, this is the first movie since of course, Rocky Jr. was born in Rocky 2. This is the first movie in which the character does not appear. And, but, basically, and it's brought up, the subject is brought up when Adonis notices the picture of Rocky.
And we pointed out that was a picture of Sylvester Stallone and his son Sage.
Yeah, who played Rocky Jr. in Rocky 5. And then sadly died of what was ruled a heart attack in 2012, as we mentioned in the Rocky 5 episode, at the age of 36. And obviously knowing that it's his son who died obviously makes it more sentimental.
Right.
But, Stallone, you mentioned that he moved to Vancouver, which is telling because obviously one of the, big plot elements in the movie Rocky Balboa was that, he felt like he was in his father's shadow, and it's interesting that he, not only left Philadelphia, but he he left the country, and not only left the country, but he moved to the westernmost, the major Canadian city that's the furthest away from Philadelphia.
Right.
And also mentioned that he's there not with his wife but with his girlfriend, and that just seems to really underscore a trend, which is fewer people are getting married these days.
Right.
And so
well, it's interesting you say too, where Adonis didn't just volunteer to Bianca, that he was Apollo Creed's son, and aside from he wanted to make it on his own name and all of that. How much do you actually, he doesn't know where the relationship's going with this young woman. When you first meet somebody, how much do you actually feel the need to reveal about yourself? And she was really upset about it, and I kept thinking, well, why is she so upset at this point in time?
Yeah, and the way I look at it, I mean, there are two forms of lying, the way I define it. One is obviously making a statement that's false. The other is intentionally withholding pertinent information. Now, obviously, if they're going to get married or something, that's something he should reveal. But at that stage in the relationship, I don't think it would be necessary for him to reveal that.
Right,
yet.
and I was saying that. I said I didn't think it was pertinent at that time.
So yeah, I don't think it was a big deal. I think she made too big a deal over it, but. Anyway, along the way, we're going a little bit out of order here, but Adonis did, follow the Tommy Gunn precedent and moved in with Rocky.
Right.
So Rocky's obviously very generous, sharing his home,
right.
With these fighters he's training. And of course, when he moved in, Tommy, he was still living with Adrian, Paulie, and Rocky Jr.
And in effect, displaced Rocky Jr.
Yeah. And, So
I think maybe there was an underlying thing where and actually what happened with this is talking about Rocky was talking about making the training more intense or something like that, and it was Adonis who basically was, okay, when do I move in?
Yeah.
I mean, so. And Rocky didn't just come out and tell him no, I get that, but I thought it was interesting that it actually came from Adonis. To move in.
And of course, I think Rocky, being that he's living alone now, maybe, the loneliness is getting to him. Maybe that's part of the reason why he was, open to it. And, there's another interesting thing, basically Adonis gets Paulie's old room.
Right.
And you notice that everything is still there. And, I've never been in a situation like this, but I know that sometimes when somebody dies, that person's spouse or child or parent or whatever will just leave everything in that person's room intact, for whatever reason, sentimental or whatever. Maybe it feels too final to just clean everything out, or maybe you just like having those reminders of the person,
Right.
But yeah, you see that Paulie's, the date of death on his tombstone is in the year 2012. So 3 years later, his stuff is all still there.
It's still there.
And then along the way we also see that that Danny Stuntman Wheeler, the guy who beat up Adonis in the gym back in L.A. Had a light heavyweight world championship fight scheduled with the reigning undefeated champion Pretty Ricky Conlan, played by real life boxer Tony Bellew, and it ended up getting canceled because they got into a fight at the weigh-in, in which Wheeler suffered a broken jaw.
Yeah.
and it's also mentioned that Wheeler is facing a 7-year prison sentence, a possible 7-year prison sentence for gun possession, and that so that his next fight could be his last. Um, and anyway, after the news breaks that, and by the way, I did see once quite a few years ago, maybe like early '90s or so, a fight that actually did take place at a weigh-in. So
Oh.
maybe that's what was the inspiration. Maybe that was the inspiration
sure.
for this. But so anyway, then we see right after it's discovered that Adonis is Apollo's son. You see Conlan over who's from Liverpool, England, by the way.
Yeah.
So it made it surprising that there are no references to the Beatles in this movie, because I think now worldwide people think about Liverpool for their soccer team, but in America Liverpool is almost exclusively associated with the Beatles. Um, but the Liverpool Football Club is famous worldwide, and anyway though. So you see that Conlan is over there, and he's with his manager, Tommy Holliday, played by Graham McTavish, another British actor, and Bellew himself is British, by the way. And so anyway, Tommy Holliday feels that this could be their payday, that they could use the gimmick that this is Apollo's son.
Right.
And Conlan is against it. And, Graham McTavish previously starred with Sylvester Stallone in the movie Rambo from 2008, which was, despite its non-sequential title, actually the fourth and last film in the Rambo series. And in this movie, in the Rambo movie, Graham McTavish played one of the mercenaries who joined with Stallone's title character to rescue a group of humanitarian aid workers in Burma, and he and Stallone played adversaries on the same team. And basically, in this movie, the character of Tommy Holliday is a milder version of the character who McTavish played in Rambo, a character named Lewis. Lewis was extremely antagonistic, extremely profane, extremely abrasive. Holliday, is basically just a toned down version of that character. He's someone who they take that formula and apply it to this situation where he's someone who is very someone who's very aggressive in trying to keep his man balanced, who knows that this guy's lack of control, with carrying a gun around, and with punching a guy at a weigh-in, that he's not made the best decisions, and so he knows that before he goes to prison, he's got to get a payday, for his children.
He was mentioning that.
So it's he's a very abrasive character, and but someone but in this film he's looking out for his man, and feeling like he has to be tough because he knows how imbalanced his man is, so he has to be tough to keep him in line. And basically, when Conlan says, "This isn't how I want to be remembered," then Tommy says, "I don't care how you're remembered. I care about your kids having a roof over their head when this thing is over." And obviously he's a much more sensible guy than his protege is.
I think that's probably true in a lot of fighter.
I'm sure, yeah.
Trainer manager situations, I would say.
Yeah, it is, yeah, and so anyway, so that Tommy calls Rocky and sets up a meeting and offers him the chance for the light heavyweight championship of the world. And that in itself is interesting, it's interesting that the climactic fight is for the light heavyweight championship, because back in the days when the first few Rocky movies came out, the heavyweight division overshadowed all the others. You had, when Ali was in the twilight of his career when the first came out, and then over the first few movies you had Larry Holmes, Michael Spinks, Mike Tyson, guys who were big draws who everybody in the public had heard of. And now the heavyweight division is very I wouldn't say obscure, but it certainly is nowhere near as dominant as it was, and now it's some of the lower weight classes that are getting more publicity now.
Right.
So, and of course, one of the themes of the movie Rocky Balboa was the decline of the heavyweight division. So, anyway, so Rocky thinks that his man isn't ready for a title fight, right. And of course, and tries to discourage Adonis by saying he's doing this because he thinks you're a sure thing, and so certainly there are people who get in the ring with the champ too early. I always think about poor Marvis Frazier, Joe's Frazier's son, who got into the ring with Larry Holmes after only 10 fights and gotten knocked out in the first round, and people heavily criticized his father Joe Frazier after that for trying to move his son up the ladder too quickly. In fact, they're in a classic moment. Marvis's mouthpiece actually got knocked out of his mouth, which is one of the most. That seems to be the image people remember the most from that fight. But it's one of those things. I watched it live when it happened, and clearly the kid had no business in the ring with the champ. But anyway, though, in fact, a piece of trivia about that fight: on 5 occasions in the first round, Holmes asked the referee to stop the fight, and then the referee didn't, so Holmes punched him again, and Frazier was just standing up there not mounting any defense other than holding his arms up. And finally, after 5 times, the referee finally rang the bell and stopped the fight. But and a lot of people credit Holmes for being a good sport about it. I mean, if he had wanted to, he probably could have killed the guy, as lax as the referee was being. But anyway, back to the movie here. Rocky, tells Adonis basically, I don't think you're ready, but if you want to do it, I'll train you. And so, Adonis decides to do it, right. But during the training, Rocky becomes, violently ill, and that leads to the revelation that he has lymphoma. And the timing of this episode is tragically ironic because my frequent collaborator Michael Muncie, a film collaborator I was in 4 films that he directed, died on Friday of lymphoma. And in response to that, I just yesterday I did a super deep movie analysis on his short film In the Right Time. But anyway, though. So Rocky learns that he has lymphoma, and even though you and I, as we will go on to say, we have some disputes over, the way some things were portrayed in the film later on, I was moved by his reaction that basically he takes it as, okay, this is it for me, right. And now I'm just gonna, this must be my time, And he says he doesn't want to take chemotherapy, and he says it didn't work so good for my wife. Right. And so, and then, while I think one thing, this is another one of those minor details where the nurses try to encourage him, and he just, walks away without listening to what she's saying, and just assume that's it. So they go to the gym, and then Adonis sees these brochures on lymphoma in Rocky's coat, and then questions him about it, and and Rocky acknowledges that he has the disease, and Adonis tells him he's got to start chemotherapy immediately, right. And even offers to drive him to the hospital. And then Rocky basically tries to shy it off, and just seems like he's just he's content to just go away and die, and then at this time, Rocky's not someone, I guess he's not someone who's generally prone to a lot of self-pity. He does go through some of it in 3. But this is one time where he starts feeling sorry for himself, and, it's something that I don't, can you think of any other time in the series where Rocky tries to push somebody out of his life?
No, dead silence.
Yeah. Because I'm thinking about that.
Yeah. No, but I'm thinking too, though, that I'm going to speak saying I understand his reluctance on the chemotherapy.
Oh yeah.
Now, Lec and I do not want a lot of people coming on us about how wonderful chemo is and how it saved your aunt or whatever.
Yeah.
I'm just expressing that everybody doesn't have a great result with it. Rocky expresses that Adrian did not have a great result with it.
And my stepmother, I witnessed firsthand, did not, when she had pancreatic cancer.
So...
and she, before her death, she turned strongly against chemotherapy, by the way. But go ahead.
But, so where I am with it is, my view is that Rocky probably, when it didn't work so well for Adrian all that time ago, probably even had made a decision right then, thinking, if I ever get diagnosed with anything, I'm not doing it.
Yeah.
I mean, and that happens, and I think that probably does happen when you see it go afoul for somebody.
Yeah.
And I think that's possibly what had happened. And when he came to that point, probably what was going on with him is, well, I'd already made this decision.
Yeah.
And yet everybody around him, it's like you never question.
Yeah.
You just automatically do it.
Yeah.
And unlike him, though, he'd already had this experience where like I said, it didn't work. And he had to stop and think about whether he would make that decision for himself already. He'd already gone through all that mentally. So it was probably a lot easier for him to just say, no, thank you.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of what happened there. And so he was comfortable with his decision because it was one he'd already pre-decided. Or predetermined. And the thing with Adonis, I guess maybe he got closer to Adonis than he was hoping to, in general too. But so here Adonis wants him to take the treatment because that's what you do.
Yeah.
And you can go on.
Yeah. Well, I think that maybe Rocky was trying to push Adonis away, maybe not wanting Adonis to have to witness everything like that.
Right.
And I mean, like my Uncle Steve, for example, he knew that he was dying and he didn't tell anybody, even his wife. In fact, he flat out lied to his wife about his condition, saying that he was going to be fine. And his wife was German, and she's a teacher, and she would go over to Europe every year on summer vacation. And he died alone in his home while she was in Europe, and she was in Malta. It took her 4 days to get back into the country after she learned of his death. And I just think he didn't want anybody pitying him and feeling sorry for him, and maybe that was Rocky's motivation as well. That also he figures that, look, I'm gonna die, so just I want to save Adonis the burden of it,
Right, and I think that they were both at that time. They had that, speaking out of being hurt, though, too.
Oh yeah. And of course Rocky said something he should not have said, which is, basically saying that we're not really a family or something like that, which of course he never should have said. But and then that's of course obviously angers Adonis, understandably, and then
saying, hey, you killed my family or got my family killed.
That came when later in the film. But I also want to say something really quickly about the subject of chemotherapy. I'll try not to get jump around too much here, but there's a problem I have with the way this was done. And granted, I'm sure Ryan Coogler doesn't know any different than this, because of most people don't, most Americans don't. But there's this false dichotomy that you either have to go away and die, or you have to get chemotherapy.
Right.
But there are other options too. There are other. I mean, I always look at, for example, two high-profile celebrities, Suzanne Summers and Olivia Newton-John. They both treated breast cancer without chemotherapy. They're both survivors of about 25 years each now, and as far as I can tell, they're doing better than ever. They're both into they're both into, I think, nutrition and natural healing and things like that.
Right.
And by the way, even had they died, their bodies wouldn't have been so decimated from the cancer.
Right.
But obviously they didn't die. They're still, I know Olivia Newton-John is, I guess, mid-60s or so. I guess Suzanne Summers is.
Again, I have to qualify this by saying we're not giving anybody any advice. This is something for
The advice I'm giving people is explore your options. Don't just assume. And like I said to you, another thing that Rocky does wrong. Whenever you have that kind of diagnosis, you should always get a second opinion.
Right.
Because first of all, sometimes doctors are wrong, and then as you pointed out, sometimes doctors lie about people having cancer just to do the treatment so they can make the money.
Yeah, and in fact, there are several articles out about that. There was a doctor arrested in Michigan.
Yeah,
for diagnosing healthy people with cancer.
Yeah.
And once that came out, apparently they started looking into it and found out he wasn't the only one.
Yeah, so I'm explore your options, because you have options,
And get a second opinion.
Get a second opinion and just look out there, go online, and don't believe everything you see on the internet, but see what the consensus of people say, people who've tried these different options, and make what you think the best decision is for yourself. But and by the way, I want to say in regard to Michael Muncy, I didn't get into this on the In the Right Time episode. I did mention his death, of course, which was the reason why I decided to do that film, when I did for the episode. But he was diagnosed last September 28th, and he made the announcement he posted the announcement on his Facebook status on November 2nd, which was 9 days after the last time I worked with him on the film Dead Surrogate. And by the way, I thought he looked fine. I never had any clue that there was anything wrong with him. But then he announced on February the 26th that he had finished chemotherapy and was now in remission. But sadly, that would be, from what I could see of his Facebook post, that apparently was the last post he ever made. And about a week ago, I started seeing reports from people in his family, including his father, that his condition had gotten very bad, and then he died on Friday. Which 28 days after he said he was in remission. So anyway, so then Adonis goes to a gig that Bianca has, which I guess is a pretty big gig for her, and somebody addresses him as Baby Creed, and Adonis takes offense to it and punches the guy. And some people might think that's a stretch, but I'll tell you, you never know what's going to set certain people off,
or what the circumstances that you've
and obviously having been hurt by Rocky, obviously he's going to be more prone to an outburst. Right. Having feel probably betrayed by Rocky, that to be told that they're not a family,
Right.
And of course, a sports fan, I've seen a few fights over the years, or read about some, and the most famous or infamous coach-player feud ever was between Latrell Sprewell and his coach on the Golden State Warriors, P.J. Carlesimo, in 1997, when Sprewell choked and threatened to kill Carlesimo in a practice. And what set Sprewell off is that he had just thrown a pass that apparently Carlesimo thought was too soft. So Carlesimo told him he needed to put more mustard on the pass. So, I mean, if that can set off, somebody, I mean, certainly being called Baby Creed can. And, and I'll tell you, there's one thing, I was named after my Uncle Steve. Most people outside of film call me Steve or Steven. And I remember my grandmother, while she certainly meant no harm for it, she often addressed me as Little Steve to distinguish me from my Uncle Steve. And I absolutely hated it. And I never beat up my grandmother, right. But I hated it. And I can see, how he wouldn't like being called Baby Creed. And, so anyway, he gets arrested, and Rocky tries to get him out of jail, but,
And, it's interesting, because something I hadn't thought about until just now is, he started out kind of in juvenile, and now he's back in a cell.
Yeah. And so, but, we've seen that, he's a guy who has a short fuse, and, probably a lot of it stems from the anger that he had, growing up, and of course, I think we forgot to mention that it was, even though the details are vague, it is known that Adonis's biological mother had died as well.
Right.
So you're a 12 or 13-year-old kid, with both your parents are dead. You're going to be angry, probably,
Yeah.
And so anyway, then Rocky tries to apologize, saying he didn't mean what he said, but Adonis, that's when, and this is, something that is, I think, is one of the worst parts of human nature. Adonis didn't say anything earlier about this, but now that he's mad at Rocky, then it comes out that, you got my real family killed, and Adonis didn't say anything about it when he and Rocky were getting along well, but now when, Adonis is mad at Rocky for something else, then that comes out because,
and it's not even, I said even that he really deep down thought it, it just, I think he was, what can I, he hurt me really bad, what can I say that would hurt him?
Yeah, exactly. But I think sometimes people, they excuse certain things about people as long as they're getting along well, but then when something bad happens, then this other anger for other things comes out.
Right, exactly.
But anyway, so Adonis basically tells Rocky to get lost, and so Rocky leaves dejectedly, and then Adonis gets out of jail, apologizes to Bianca, and she rejects it, and
right.
So Adonis goes home to Rocky and basically makes that deal, if I fight, you fight. I'm not going to do the fight if you don't get the treatment. And so Rocky begins the chemotherapy, and as you and I pointed out, it is not a realistic portrayal of chemotherapy.
Yeah, one of the first things is, and this is something Coogler would not know, possibly, when they give chemo, there's usually a skull and crossbones on the door to alert people that, and the door wouldn't be open either.
Yeah.
But just so that's a first thing I noticed.
And of course, it makes you very, very sick. And we see a couple of mild instances of Rocky sick, and we see his hair thinning, things like that. And finally in the Conlan fight, he's wearing a cap, covering up his head. But
most people wouldn't have made that, been physically able to get
get over
to another country.
Right. So, they really and again, Coogler probably doesn't know any better, but and he went to great care to get a lot of details of this movie correct as far as references to the other Rocky films and things like that, as well as boxing in general. But that's one where he clearly does not understand, and hopefully, he's a young guy, hopefully he will, although a lot of people a lot older than him don't understand it. And I was surprised that my stepmother, having worked in nursing for 45 years, at the age of 71 was even willing to start chemotherapy, and she only did 3 sessions and then she decided it was awful.
Right.
And but anyway, so it really they really underportrayed the devastating effects of chemotherapy in this film. But on the other hand, there were, and it's interesting, by the way, that it was that the chemotherapy was part of the training montage in this film, which was set to that fantastic piece by Ludwig Göransson. But anyway, it was overall, it was an inspiring training scene, and it was shot very differently than the training montages from that involved Rocky. It was very high tech, and it was interesting to see that at the end, Adonis is out there with with these guys on motorcycles driving around, and that was pretty cool.
Well, it was like he didn't, like Rocky 2, where Rocky's doing his run and he's going to go ahead and people start joining him. Yeah. And I guess in my own way, that's what I was seeing this as.
Okay, that could be. It was well shot nevertheless, and I loved the music for the scene. I thought it was very uplifting and inspiring. But it just had this power, almost like heavy metal like power, even though obviously there were no electric guitars. But just the pounding of the drums and the 100-piece orchestra. I thought it was just sensationally put together. And another thing that really stands out in my mind, Pretty Ricky Conlan was a very interesting villain. I don't know if you would call him, I think really more of an antagonist. I think you'd call him more of an antagonist than a villain. But as far as all the opponents, he wasn't cartoonish, even though I think his pomposity was a little bit overblown.
I don't know. I know some actors who were like that.
Yeah.
No, I'm not looking at him for that reason. I'm looking at him because he knows who I'm talking about.
Yeah. But, during the training montage, to me, one of the best parts is when it shows Conlan, I don't know what you call it because I don't really know that much about boxing. But, you see somebody who's one of his training partners is holding up these pads and he's punching them, and it was done up close, and, you hear you hear the sound of him, punching the bags. And since Tony Bellew actually is a real boxer, as opposed to, Dolph Lundgren or Mr. T or Carl Weathers, it really, it just looks and feels so authentic, and it almost hurt for me to watch it. The music and the sound effects and everything. I thought it was extremely well put together, and to me, that made Conlan in some ways more intimidating than the bad guys from the previous films, just because it looked like a real high level boxer, and there was just like a physical power that I didn't detect from those previous guys.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, obviously they all looked big and tough, but the way that Bellew was punching,
Well, and actually too, what was interesting is that he was training. I almost want to say I don't want to say didn't match the joke that he thought Adonis was. He thought, that the fight was going to be really easy.
Yeah.
But he wasn't training like he thought that.
Yeah, he was training like, he was going to be his last fight and he wanted to go out with a bang.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, and so, anyway, the training scene ends with Rocky, looking down at Adonis, approvingly
Mm-hmm.
from the window, and so then we go over to Liverpool and the mandatory press conference.
Oh, those scenes are great.
Yeah.
I mean,
And so anyway, Rocky and Adonis are there. Then Conlan and his manager Tommy Holiday come in, and Conlan is making a series of abrasive comments. And as we see from the end, when he's gracious toward Adonis at the end of the fight, we see when you look back at his press conference comments in that context, it looks like he was just trying to get inside Adonis's head and psych him out and just.
Well, and I think that's what we've seen with other press conference situations.
Yeah.
And and I'm going to say this, and like in the one I guess in 4, it was Apollo Creed doing that, or trying to.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
So I think that's just kind of a thing that, and I don't watch boxing press conferences, but it seems like it seems like it's the par for the course.
It could be, yeah. I haven't seen a lot of boxing press conferences, but maybe there are a lot of them who try to get into somebody's head like that, and especially someone who's doesn't have a lot of experience, and of course that was one of the things that Conlan was basically saying that he had accomplished nothing, that Conlan was saying that Adonis had accomplished nothing, that he was only there because of his father. And of course that's one thing that one plot element we forgot to mention is that one of the conditions of Adonis getting the Conlan fight was to change his name to Creed, I guess for marketing.
Well, yeah, because that was the big thing for
yeah. And of course he reluctantly did that, but and of course that ended up being part of the one of the major plot elements, which was Adonis coming to terms with who he was, and finding peace as Apollo Creed's son. And because there had been that that dichotomy in the beginning, that on one hand he in private he watched his father's fights and imitated them, but at the same time he didn't want anybody to know.
Right.
So anyway, then this movie sort of has its version of when Adrian showed up in the USSR.
Right. There you go.
When Bianca shows up.
But it's obvious that Rocky got her there, because he comes in there and he's like, "Do you hear something?"
Yeah. So it appears that all is forgiven.
Right.
And then I don't really predict a lot of things in movies that well, but when I saw that he had that that wrapped package, I had a feeling it was going to be Apollo's shorts.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I knew that. I did too.
So he opens that, and it's a present from his mother, and you see that Marianne's finally going to give him. So finally he has the blessing of both Bianca and his adoptive mother, and so he's wearing the red, white, and blue Creed trunks. That they say Creed on them.
And Johnson on the back, I think.
Yeah, that sounds right. Yeah,
it was both.
And the fight scene, by the way, it was filmed at the soccer stadium of Everton, which is one of the major soccer teams in the United Kingdom. And Stallone actually is a Everton fan, it turns out. So maybe he suggested they film it there. But and Stallone actually, along with Pele in what I believe is his only acting role, made an ill-fated soccer movie called Victory, like around 80 or 81. And so anyway, they go out there, and I think one thing that a lot of Americans don't really grasp. I mean, I think most Americans are intellectually aware that soccer is the biggest sport in the world, but I don't think they really fully. I don't think you really fully understand it until you've actually been in Europe or South America or some other part of the world. Just the sheer fanaticism. I think one thing that's interesting to me when I talk to people from other countries is that they seem to think it's odd that American sports fans, they follow baseball, then they follow football, then basketball, and go around in a circle, because they just most countries it's just soccer all year long. I mean, like for example, one time I was in Norway when there were several feet of snow on the ground, but their national team was playing in some warm weather country.
Oh, okay.
So, but I mean, soccer is practically religion in a lot of countries. In fact, that might even be understating it. But I mean, here in Indianapolis, we're Colts fans, but when the Colts lose a game on Sunday, people typically go to work on Monday. It's not uncommon, in other countries, if your team loses a big match, you're so sick you stay home the next day.
Okay.
And so anyway, but because they filmed it, actually they filmed the Conlan fight, or at least the crowd for it, at an Everton soccer match. So I love the way the crowd feels. You can you sense the fanaticism of it.
Yeah.
And I really don't know how big boxing is in the United Kingdom. I don't know if they would fill a stadium even for a local celebrity or not for boxing. I don't know, but nevertheless, I like the crowd makes it feel like you're right there. Coogler did a great job capturing the fanaticism of the Everton soccer fans, and which really enhanced that scene. So anyway, they step out, and then we get a very when they step out to for the introduction to the fight, we get an overt reference to Rocky IV, where they're told to touch gloves, and then Conlan pounds down Adonis's gloves, like Drago did to Rocky when he said, "I must break you." Did he do that to Apollo as well?
Yeah.
Okay. So did Drago do that to both Rocky and Apollo?
I know he did it to Apollo because it surprised him.
Yeah, I know.
Because that was the first sense of where Apollo got the idea how strong he was.
And of course that was when Drago, he said his first line of the film, "You will lose."
Yeah.
And but I of course I know he said, "I must break you" to Rocky, but did he punch Rocky's hands down? I don't remember.
No. Now's not the time to try to remember.
Yeah, oh well. But anyway, obviously it was a reference to Rocky IV.
Yeah.
So that they start the match, and because it's a Rocky sequel, it means that the good guy gets pummeled in round 1, but then makes a comeback in round 2.
Right.
And then in what looks to be particularly a reference to Rocky IV, although it could be a reference to Rocky Balboa as well. In round 2, Adonis cuts Conlan just as he cut Drago in the second one, and of course in the second round of Rocky Balboa he knocked Dixon down after Dixon broke his hand.
Right. Yeah, and I guess it's one of those things too where that's the wake up call for the.
Yeah, and
Conlan. It was a wake up call, definitely.
Right. Yeah, and
yeah, he.
And then since um, at the press conference and then early in the fight, Adonis hadn't really done a lot to fire back verbally at Conlan, but this time I liked when Adonis is shouting, "You bleed like me." That's when he's starting to get his confidence.
Right. Oh yeah.
And so they go on, a few more rounds, and there's a really one of my favorite lines, is when Rocky shouts to around between, I think it was maybe between round 7 and 8 or so, where he shouts, bring back everything that ever hurt you, all the pain you felt inside. And there's so much insight into that, in the just motivation, as we'll get to with another example later in the film. Motivation has so much to do with how much you can take, and sometimes and even for all the flaws that Rocky 5 had, the scene where Tommy Gunn is talking about how he was beaten by his father, and now whenever he's in the ring, when he sees his father when he looks at his opponent, so thinking about all that pain, it can be a motivating factor, and the will that you have to stay alive, can has a great determining factor on how much you can endure, but I love the passion that Rocky said it with, and of course Rocky had been there before,
right.
and was able to, and that's one time where it takes me back to that line from Rocky 4. There's no strategy in this fight anymore, from one of the commentators, and at that point Rocky knew it's not about giving him strategy, it's about his motivation at this point, and that point, bring back everything that's ever hurt you, all the pain you felt inside. That could be the motivation for him at that point. So then you get to the 11th round, and by the way, it should be noted that 1, 2, and 4 all went 15 rounds, and now basically the standard across boxing has been reduced to 12 rounds as the maximum length of fights, including in this fight here. But so they get to the 11th round, and then in one of the most gruesome moments of the whole series, Conlan connects with a vicious right hand, and then Adonis in slow motion goes down. And then I thought this scene was extremely well edited. And then you see Conlan climbing up on the ropes to celebrate what he believes is his win. And of course, that's somewhat reminiscent of the time when Apollo knocked Rocky down, and then turns around and goes like that, and then he turns around and is stunned to see that Rocky's getting back up.
Right. Oh yeah.
And but this time, Conlan is even more bombastic, that he's actually climbing on the ropes and celebrating. And then so then we get to the let me back up here. So then Adonis is down on the canvas, lifeless apparently, and then I like it's about a 40-second flashback where you see a series of things that have happened to him, and that the last thing you see is Apollo in the ring, and then it's right after that. Then all of a sudden he suddenly gets up.
Yeah.
And it's like instant. It's like he looks dead, and all of a sudden he just comes back to life suddenly with the memory of his father. And I thought that was just wonderfully put together. And there's a lot of things that could have motivated him at that point, but that it's the memory of his father, and wanting to honor his father's legacy, that is the final thing that gets him up.
And during all this too, you see that Mary Ann's actually watching.
Yeah, and I love some of her reactions, and like I was saying, acting alone is so much harder, and I know this from experience. Acting alone is so much harder than when you don't have somebody to react to, and play off of. And and of course it's ironic, when Carl Weathers auditioned for Rocky, not knowing who Stallone was, he felt like, Weathers thought he wasn't giving a very good audition. He said, "I'll do a lot better if you get me a real actor to read the lines with me," and only to find out that Stallone was the one reading the lines to him. But Rocky thought, that's the kind of attitude we want from, Apollo.
Oh yeah.
And so
it worked.
It got him the part, and but yeah, it was great that that it was his father, that the memory of his father that got him to stand up. And then so they go between the 11th and 12th round, and then Adonis's eye is swollen shut.
Yeah, and this was one of my favorite bits because they covered up the open eye, and they were holding up fingers, and
one of the cornermen,
was tapping.
Yeah, the referee was, wanted to make sure that he could see, so he was holding up, he was covering Adonis's good eye and then holding up fingers and asking him, and
how many?
One of Adonis's friends was tapping the number on the...
I just thought that, it was funny because I'm not sure the referee kind of didn't believe it, but he had to let him in because he couldn't prove anything.
Yeah.
That was just one of those things.
I'll tell you, when I saw it was swollen shut, I was bracing myself for a repeat of the
cut.
Yeah.
Oh, me too. I was too.
And that would have been, I guess Coogler probably thought that would have been a little too, overdoing it.
Yeah.
But
oh my gosh. So they pulled that little stunt to get him back in.
Yeah. And then of course there's another repeat of Rocky 2, where basically Tommy Holiday tells Ricky that he's ahead on all, he's ahead on points, so all he has to do is just stay away and not get knocked down. And of course that was what Duke told Apollo.
Right.
And of course Apollo's pride had to go for the knockdown, and that's what did him in. But then you have one of the touching moments of the film where I don't know if any between round conversation between boxer and trainer has ever gone like this, but of course I do like the dilemma that Rocky felt, that he felt guilt-ridden over not stopping the Apollo fight, and now he thinks he needs to stop this. But then in a touching moment, Adonis said, I need to prove that I'm not a mistake. And sadly, there are people who, through no fault of their own, obviously it's not your fault how you were conceived,
Right. Oh yeah.
And so, but there are people who would dismiss somebody as being a mistake, and obviously whether you win a boxing match or not doesn't change who you are, but I can understand why somebody would feel the need to prove themselves that way.
Right. And even in that, not just as a mistake being born, but as a mistake, to the people who are saying he's just, he just thinks he can box because he's Creed's son.
Yeah.
He wants to prove that he can actually box.
Yeah, although it was saying that proving that he wasn't a mistake, that's why he said he wanted to go on.
Right, exactly.
But that certainly could be a motivating factor as well, with what you just mentioned. But anyway, then, so then Rocky gives him his big motivational speech, and saying that, I'm trying to think what he said. He said something like, I'm going to go home and fight this, and unfortunately he was referring to, fighting with chemotherapy, but nevertheless he said he was going to fight it, and, even though I don't agree with chemotherapy, at least fighting is, fighting on against your demons, that is the overall theme of the series, so it was fitting in that way. And then, he says, now you need to fight too, and one of the probably the strongest language that Rocky ever uses in the film. He says, you go over there and knock the son of a bitch down, and then makes Adonis repeat it, that he's going to knock the son of a bitch down, and said something like, because you're a Creed and I love you.
Yeah. Now see, that was reminiscent too to that was always reminiscent to Mickey.
Oh yeah.
In his memory of
yeah, get up, you son of a bitch, because Mickey loves you.
Mickey loves you, yeah.
Yeah, that was one of my favorite moments of Rocky 5.
Oh, yeah.
And like we agreed at the time, the best moments in Rocky 5 are up there with the best moments in any of the other movies. It's just that there are so many bad moments that are unparalleled in the series. But, that was a great moment of Rocky 5, though, those Burgess Meredith flashbacks. And
so that was reminiscent here.
Yeah.
Just he used the love as a motivation too.
Yeah, and so it's you're Creed and I love you. And then the first time I saw it, I actually saw it the day before. It's a limited number of theaters actually did a preview of the movie a day before its release, and I went to the theater over at Avon to see it, and I was so tense for most of the movie because of the way the movie was shot and all the subject matter and everything. But then when they started playing the opening of Gonna Fly Now, that was one of the few times I actually smiled during the movie. And I just thought it was so brilliant to put that right there, because the opening notes of that song are so associated with motivation and the whole spirit of the underdog, you know. I thought it was just a perfect time to put that in. And even though they only played the introduction, because people, you know, always associate that with the opening of those training montages, but they play the opening few measures, and then they go into what was it? The song "Going the Distance," which was played during the Rocky Apollo fight in the original Rocky, and then was played during the first part of the training montage in Rocky 2. So they play that throughout the last round.
Yeah.
And of course, Conlan ignores his trainer's advice and goes for the knockdown, and finally, you know, he gets knocked down himself, and it's mentioned that you can't be saved by the bell, so you know. And you know, I love the reaction of Mrs. Creed while she's finally at the end. She says, "Knock his ass down."
Right.
That was a great line, especially knowing that she didn't want him to get into it, but now finally
she's going to be supportive.
Yeah.
He's doing it, you know.
And finally, when Conlan goes down, she says, "That's what I'm talking about." And then so Conlan is dazed, and then you hear Tommy, you know, his trainer, yelling at him to get up, and which, you know, was, you know, it reminded me of, you know, some of his moments from the Rambo movie, since he was very, very forceful in that movie. But finally, Conlan gets up at the count of 9, and of course, it's determined, and you know, I should say, before I saw the movie, I was looking at trivia on IMDb, and somebody had, I guess, seen a preview or like an advanced screening, and it said spoiler alert, but I just didn't take notice of the spoiler alert, and as I saw that Conlan won the fight by decision, so I already knew that in advance, but it didn't really ruin it for me, because I expected that Conlan would win anyway.
Yeah, I was going to say, I didn't read anything, and to me, that's pretty typical of the Rocky series.
Yeah.
Of Rocky and Rocky Balboa.
Yeah.
You know, with I was expecting it.
Yeah, I was too.
And of course that opens the door again for the sequel where he wins.
Right, and I mean, for example, like the whole thing about Bianca, you know, having progressive hearing loss, you know, it could be that somebody close to Coogler has that problem and he was trying to make light of it. That would not be unusual, you know, when you know somebody who suffered from a problem, it's natural that you want to, you know, portray it in a film. But, you know, it also could be they're trying to set up a plot element in a future Creed movie.
Right.
Where, you know, maybe she'll be in the hospital, you know, completely deaf, and she'll sign him, you know, win.
Oh no!
Because I know when
we're going to do a whole other episode where we make predictions.
We got to do that. That'll be a good one.
I think that'd be great.
Because of course I remember when we were doing the supplement on the Creed trailers, and we saw that Rocky was sick. We didn't know what he was going to be sick with, but we thought maybe he'd be lying in the hospital until Adonis to win. You know, like of course Adrian did after she woke up from her coma.
But it makes
Rocky
more
2.
sense with the female, I guess.
Yeah, and you know, of course, if she signs it to him, I guess it'd be more touching.
I guess.
Yeah, and
I think it's that. Somebody go.
Oh, yeah, I don't know,
I forget.
I don't know any sign. I don't know any sign language at all.
I know the alphabet a little bit.
Oh, okay.
I'm terrible at it, so.
But so anyway, Conlan wins by split decision, and then you know, I like the post match interview where he says says that he knows that his mom is mad at. He says something like, "I know my mom's mad at me for doing this, but I hope I made her proud," and I love her reaction. You know, you about gave me a heart attack, but I'm proud of you.
Yeah.
And I asked my mom the other day, by the way, what she would have done had my brother or me got into boxing, and she just, you know, cringed.
Yeah.
I don't think she ever would have watched one of my matches, but.
Well, you know, on the other hand, if your father had been a professional fighter, it would have been a different story. She might have, even if she didn't agree with it, she might have watched it anyway because she'd already done that.
Yeah, maybe, you know, you never know, but.
No, but maybe this is who she was.
Yeah.
You know, and she can't change who she is either.
Yeah, and of course, obviously, you know, she by sending him the trunk, she was giving her blessing, obviously. And so she obviously came to terms with who he was, even if she didn't completely have comfort with it. But so anyway, so that and then I also liked his response asking what he would say to his father. That I would tell him I love him and I know he didn't leave me on purpose and I'm proud to be a Creed. Those nice closing words, and then finally, in a very moving scene, play on probably the most famous moment in the series. You see Rocky now struggling to walk up the steps. And standing there with Adonis, and we don't know what's going to happen to Rocky after that, but it could be they'll do a sequel and he's perfectly fine, or maybe continuing to fight it will be a plot element, but we'll see. But
because we do know there is another one in the works.
Yeah, scheduled for release in November of 2017 next year, so about a year and 8 months from now, and which, by the way, if that happens that way, it will be the shortest gap between Rockies. They had one every 3 years from 76 to 85, then another 5 years till 5, and another 16 years till Rocky Balboa, and then another 9 years till Creed. So, there's a lot that can still happen. A lot of plot elements that can be explored. Old and new, and Marie and Steps weren't in this one. Who knows? What? I mean, Rocky. Who knows?
They could still have some. I'm going to say this with Rocky sick.
Yeah.
Expect maybe his son would come back and see him.
Yeah, and of course, obviously, since he's still feeling that shadow, maybe that could, that's certainly a plot element that could still be explored. And what's interesting, also from the way Rocky words it, it sounds like he and his son talk to each other only occasionally.
Right.
And so that would imply that there's some discomfort there. But anyway, though, so Creed, of course, is available on DVD. This is the exclusive Walmart edition with no special features. There's also a special feature version on both DVD and Blu-ray, but I didn't think the special features were. There was a making of, and I think one other little thing, but there's no audio commentary. And I think audio commentaries are awesome. They're a great way to learn about filmmaking, and to me it enhances a DVD so much. In fact, there were two separate editions of Rocky with a different audio commentary, one by Stallone, one with Robert Chartoff, Irwin Winkler, Garrett Brown, the cinematographer, Talia Shire, Burt Young, Carl Weathers, and I think there's one other person on it. I said Talia Shire, Burt Young, Carl Weathers. Anyway, it's a big a cast of people, and then there's one just by Stallone. And the one on the box set that I have is the one with the group that I just mentioned. And I probably will get the single disc Rocky, just so here's Stallone's audio commentary, and then Stallone has a commentary on Rocky Balboa as well. But anyway, I would have loved to have heard what Stallone and or Coogler had to say about this, So I just went ahead and, bought the basic one. And then there are not one but two albums of music from the film. There's one which is called Creed Original Motion Picture Soundtrack, which features the pop music from the film, which is generally of the rap and R&B variety. And I don't have that one because it's not really my style. But then I have this one, which is called Creed Original Motion Picture Score, which is by Ludwig Göransson. And he has an interesting story. He's a native of Sweden, and they actually misspell his name here. They forgot the umlaut over the O on his name. But anyway, though, he and Ryan Coogler were classmates at USC, University of Southern California, and Göransson started doing music for Coogler's student films, the shorts that he was making. And they ended up having a great relationship despite being from very different worlds. Coogler's from Oakland, Göransson is from Sweden, but they, I guess, had a great friendship and working relationship. And then when Coogler got his big break with Fruitvale Station, he got Göransson to do the music for that, and then for Creed as well. And Göransson actually appears in the film. He's Bianca's keyboardist in the concert scene, and he's on screen for quite a few seconds. And if you know what he looks like, he's very easy to pick out. But yeah, I'm a big fan of his music for the film, and this album is about it's about an hour long, and I think every single bit of music that he does, at least close to it, is on the album, as well as some bits of dialogue from both Rocky and Adonis, some of which is featured in the film, some of which isn't. And the soundtrack albums are both available on CD and on digital download. So, what are your closing thoughts?
Just I think for anybody who may have been skeptical about this one, please, I just want people to understand it is still Rocky. It is obviously part of that brand, if you want to say that. And even though it does stand on its own, I think as Creed, but if the familiarity is there, so if anybody, I know some people have been concerned about that.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's any. I would go see it.
Yeah, and I think I was skeptical when I found out that Stallone wasn't writing it. That was written by Coogler and Aaron Covington. But then after I thought about it, I thought, Stallone at this stage in his life, the older he's gotten, the more conscious he's gotten about making movies of quality. I mean, he hasn't been, doing stuff like Stop or My Mom Will Shoot, Now you talk about a mistake, but he has gotten more conscious about quality, and I felt if he felt this would not honor the Rocky legacy, he would not have done it. Yeah. Not to mention Robert Chartoff and Irwin Winkler as well. So I agree. I think it honors the series, and Coogler clearly understood the series. And we've got to mention the chicken chasing scene, which,
Rocky said the chickens were getting slower.
Yeah. But yeah, that was a great, and also it was a, also a little bit of, the torch being passed, because, Rocky is now Stallone at 69, the same age that Burgess Meredith was when the original came out, and now Stallone is the trainer, and by the way, I forgot to mention his second go-around as a trainer turned out a lot happier than his first with Tommy Gunn.
Right.
But, we'll never know, but I wonder if the exact same movie had come out as Rocky 7, if it would have done better, worse, or, about the same. And of course,
I think if it had come out as Rocky 7, people would have been all over it about it being more about this other character. So I think the fact that it's Creed, it gets people to understand that Rocky's going to be focusing on somebody else rather than somebody focusing on him.
Yeah, and of course another thing about calling it Creed is that it will make it easier to continue the series if at some point Stallone is unable or unwilling to continue in it.
Right.
And obviously, it leaves the door more open than it otherwise would. So that was probably that's from that standpoint, it's probably good that they called it Creed. And another thing, if they had called it Rocky 7, I think just having the 7 after it would have seemed like overkill. It's like, gee, do we really need another Rocky movie?
Right.
So the fact that it was called Creed, it did, sense some newness about it, which obviously there was with a new main character. But it paid off that Stallone handed the keys to Ryan Coogler, a 29-year-old black man, who had only made one feature film, and and it worked, And one thing I want to say, and this is, well, actually two things I want to say. I mentioned Coogler being black, and certainly that changes the tone of this film. There's a lot more emphasis on black culture than in the previous films, which is fine. That's just the way it is. It's not good or bad. That's just, Coogler comes from Oakland, a very black city, and that's what you would expect. But there are times when I did have a little bit of trouble discerning some of the slang in the film. Um, Sometimes, in that culture, there are words and phrases that, like, for example, one time, after Bianca finds out that Adonis is Apollo's son, she talks about the importance of him keeping it 100 with me, which I guess is a reference to complete honesty. I think because of the context, you can usually, if you think about
I figured she meant
complete honesty.
Yeah, 100% honest.
Yeah, but it's just but I'm not familiar with that phrase
I'm
though.
not either,
So and then there were several examples like that where I had to really think, and again, usually the context gives you an idea. And the other thing, and this is something that it's part of the culture, but there were at least 3 occasions in the movie in which a black character uses the word nigger in reference to another black character, and to me, I don't use that word. One thing that's troubled me is that, when I was growing up, the word was considered to be derogatory, and of course it still is, but now you're basically, a black guy uses it. I mean, with no controversy, like it's okay, but a white person uses it and he's a racist who's ruined for life, And to me, I just wish that people would decide, is it a derogatory word or not, because if it is, nobody should use it,
Right, I agree.
So, but, again, it is an accurate portrayal of that culture. I mean, I have black friends who refer to themselves by that word. And God, I would never dare say it,
Yeah.
It's interesting. I've been on 6 or 7, well, for whatever reason, a lot of the filmmakers here in Indianapolis are black, and I've worked on 6 or 7 films in which I was literally the only white person among an otherwise all black cast and crew. And, certainly, and I should notice I've never felt like the odd man out. I've always felt very welcomed, and I felt like I was wanted there and that I was respected and valued. And I never felt that my race was, it made me less comfortable in any way. But it's just one thing that I wish were different, and it's not the end of the world, but it is, something I think is worth mentioning. And do you have any other words? Oh,
no.
I should also say that Stallone did get an Oscar nomination for this movie, and he won a Golden Globe Award. I would have sworn because his only other Oscar nomination was for the first Rocky 39 years earlier. I was thinking that's got to be the longest gap ever. And I was wrong. It's 2 years short. Henry Fonda, from The Great Gatsby to On Golden Pond, 41 years.
Okay.
And he won for On Golden Pond a few months before his death. But yeah, it's still, though, I mean, that's a long gap. And as much, Stallone was such a whipping boy for critics for so many years. For a guy like Stallone, just to get a nomination is a victory.
Oh, yes.
And in fact, there was I think the AP or one of the major wire services, they used to have an annual award for the worst Sylvester Stallone movie. But I'll tell you, Stallone he won the Golden Globe for his portrayal, in as Rocky in this movie. Like I said, got nominated for an Oscar. He also won several other minor acting awards for the role, and he also won the Razzie Redemption Award. For those of you who don't know, the Razzies are they're an annual award for like the worst in film for the year. It's like the opposite of the Oscars. But so he won their Redemption Award. So I was disappointed that was the only nomination the movie got. I would have liked to have seen Ryan Coogler get get one for Best Director, because I thought it was sensationally directed. Granted, I haven't seen any of the films that were nominated for Best Director, but for this film, after the original got those 10 Oscar nominations and won 3, the only other nomination in any of the sequels before this one was Eye of the Tiger got a nomination for Best Song from Rocky 3. That was it. But so, by the way, how would you rate this compared to the other 6?
Oh wow. That's kind of tough. Probably on par with Rocky Balboa.
Yeah, I would too. I mean, Rocky Balboa is still my favorite. I don't know where I would rank Creed, exactly.
The reason I'm kind of saying on par is just to me, because Rocky Balboa psychologically was different from 4 and 3 and 2, and you know what I mean?
Yeah.
More like that, more in a psychological thing.
Yeah, and I was really careful. I was so much I was so fired up when I walked out of the theater on that first day after seeing it. I didn't want to initially say it's my favorite Rocky because you don't want to say something based on emotion, then look back a few years from now and say, yeah, that was overdoing it. But I knew I loved it. And I'll say this: it holds its own, with the series. We'll see how I feel 5 years from now, but I think it's an awesome movie. The chemotherapy portrayal and the lack of exploration of other options, the false dichotomy that he had to either choose to die or get chemotherapy. That's Coogler, with his limited information, which doesn't make him a bad guy. I mean, a lot of well-educated, intelligent Americans have that false dichotomy in their head,
Right, exactly.
And I hope he'll learn more about it. I mean, when I was his age, I probably would have said the same thing. I mean, he's only 29 years old. I mean, he's practically a kid by my standards. I'm 45.
I don't want to think about it.
So, but yeah, he did an awesome job, and I'm glad to see the Rocky legacy continue. And like I said, a few months ago in one of our other episodes, I remember feeling sad. I was 19. It was a few weeks before I turned 20 when I saw Rocky 5, and I remember walking out of the theater sad, thinking it was over. And now I'm it's over a quarter of a century later, and it's still going strong. And I remember.
Ain't over till it's over, folks.
Yeah, and and believe me, when the kind of scathing reviews that Rocky 5 got, if you would have ever said someday Stallone will get another Oscar nomination for playing Rocky, I don't think anybody would have believed it, including Stallone.
Right.
But it's appropriate because the movie is all about coming back strong, and so that really the fact that Stallone made that kind of a comeback, not only commercially but also with getting the critics to respect him and take him seriously again, to the extent that he got an Oscar nomination. I mean, that really overcoming those obstacles is just what the series is about.
Absolutely.
And the fact that now that, because I talked about how it was great seeing that from Rocky to Rocky Balboa, those 30 years, to see a character develop over a full generation. Now we see it even more than that. Now it's closer to 2 generations, and who knows how long it'll go. But but one thing this movie proves once and for all is that it's a great character even when he doesn't fight. That you don't need Rocky to be in the ring to be a great character.
Right.
So, and that leaves the door open as long as Stallone is alive to keep making more of these movies.
Yeah.
So, any last words?
No.
Okay, well, this concludes episode 14, and we look forward to maybe doing a supplemental episode on Creed 2 predictions, and of course when the trailers come out, we'll do a little supplemental episode on that, and then when the movie comes out, obviously we'll do a full episode on that, and as well as any sequels that might pop up. Who knows? The future's wide open with that, but look forward to it, and we're seeing now that Sylvester Stallone really created a monster 40 years ago. For not bad for a film that he had a hard time getting made. A film that people actually had to provide their own clothes for. And those of us who work in film, that's a sure sign that you're on a shoestring budget.
Absolutely.
The majority of films I've been in, I had to provide my own clothes. So there are a few that it was provided for me, but not mostly. So anyway, thank you so much for joining us for episode 14. And feel free to share this video. Feel free to like Super Deep Movie Analysis on Facebook. And I will be back in the near future for another episode. I've got some solo episodes planned, and I'm sure Michelle will be joining me, for some episodes as well. And I've got some other episodes lined up for with other guest co-hosts, and I'm also thinking about trying to get some of the people who are in some of these films I Super Deep analyze to join me for either interviews or to join me in analyzing some of these movies. So we'll see how that goes, but I have a few ideas for that. So anyway, till next time for Super Deep Movie Analysis, this is Lec Zorn and Michelle Gussow. Thanks as always, and hope to see you again soon. Good night.